I'm Jennifer Whitacre Gardner, and we're going to jump in today talking about science and physiology right away. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the brain and how our brains physiologically respond to stress. And before I really get into this, I just want to say that the brain is a highly complex system involving um, estimates that we have as many as, like hundreds of billions, and that's billions with a B, of brain cells, forming an average of 10,000 connections each. So if you can fathom that number, that puts us into quadrillions of connections, neuronal connections within our own brain. And quadrillion is an actual number. It's just something that it's really hard to fathom. So trying to simplify how our brains function and trying to put it into three general areas is really a gross oversimplification of how the brains work and how our physiology works. However, that said, it can be useful to understand the brain in three general areas and looking at the brain as a three-part system. So even though this is an oversimplified view of a very complex system, it can be helpful to understand our physiology a little bit better and how our brains experience and react to stress and trauma in our lives. So with that said, let's get started. So our brain, and I want you to think about my brain as I go through this, because I'm going to use my hand. And so it's as if my hand is looking at you. So this would be the back of my head back here. So starting at the base of the brain, which would kind of be, and you're welcome to hold your hands up and do this with me. This is the hand model that's been really helpful in teaching the brain science, and it was the hand model was devised by Dr. Dan Siegel, who's a well-known psychiatrist. And so he uses your hand to describe the brain. So right here, kind of at the base of the palm of your hand and going into your wrist, that's like the brain stem. So the back of the brain back here, the brain stem and the cerebellum. And this is where survival functions play out. And survival functions include, whenever it comes to trauma, things like fight, flight, freeze, tend and befriend, please and appease, some of these different states that we experience in the nervous system while under threat. However, when it comes to our physiology, this is the part of the brain that's our autopilot. This is the part of the brain that controls things that we don't have to think about all day long. So could you imagine if you had to focus on making yourself breathe in order to survive all day, or making your heart beat all day long by thinking about it and focusing on it? It's too much for our conscious minds to take in. So it's necessary to have this autopilot functioning. And it's so important that we don't have to remember, because if we had to remember to make our hearts beat, we'd all be dead. If we had to remember to make ourselves breathe all day long, we'd all be dead by now. So the survival brain is necessary. But here's the thing. The survival brain responds to sensations and not words. So if you've ever been in a panic or been having a moment and somebody looks at you and says, "Oh, just calm down," as if that works, right? Because never in the history of calming down has anybody calmed down by being told to calm down. You have to feel it. So it's a sensory response. You can't verbally tell your heart rate to slow down or your digestion to come back online. The survival brain will do that based on sensory information that tells it it's safe to calm down, not verbal information that tells it to calm down. So that's an important aspect of how our brain works. So moving up to the center part of the brain, if you cross your thumb over your hand and oppose your thumb towards your pinky, this represents the limbic system or the emotional brain. So we've got two parts already, the survival brain and the emotional brain. And this part is super important in the expression and mediation of emotions, memory, and for the purposes of this model, the assessment of risk. The amygdala is housed here in the emotional brain or the limbic system. And the amygdala is the part of the brain that assesses risk. So it's essentially the fire alarm of the brain. So if there's a threat, the amygdala is going to sound an alarm. It's going to signal the survival brain to get ready, for action. So we can either flee or fight and survive whatever's happening. So it initiates a survival response. And then finally, if we fold our thumbs over, there's the cortex, or the outer bark of the brain. And so we call this the thinking brain because it integrates input from all three parts of the brain, and it's responsible for things like cognition, thought, language, analysis, reasoning. And, again, this is the prefrontal lobe. So this would be right behind my forehead if I'm looking straight at you. So here's the thing. Remember the amygdala in the center of the brain? When the amygdala is active and that fire alarm gets pulled, meaning there's a threat, like a tiger enters the room, we don't have time to stop. If you think about how long it takes you to decide things like, where do I want to go to dinner tonight? Or what do I want to wear in the mornings? We don't have that time in the middle of a tiger walking in the room to think. So our survival brain goes into autopilot, and we essentially flip our lid because it takes our thinking brain offline, and it takes a sensory experience to get us back online. So if you're having moments, and what our brains don't understand is whether the fire alarm was pulled because of a real threat or because of a prank. And when I say a prank, we all know those false fire alarms, like where the kid at school pulls the fire alarm just to get out of taking the test. So that's what I mean by the prank. So our brains can convince us there's a threat when there really isn't one present. And so by following the sensations in the body, we can determine whether it's a real threat or a perceived threat. So if you think you're having a perceived threat and you look around and you're like, there's no tiger, why am I panicked? Why am I anxious? This is where the tool comes in. And this tool, these are called help now strategies, and they're meant to be quick. They're meant to be something you can do immediately and in the moment when you don't have time to remove yourself from a situation and go into meditation or yoga, because we don't always have the luxury of that. And sometimes that's too much embodiment, because if the threat is too big, it can be too threatening to come back into your body and to drop into your breath and grounding way too quickly. That can actually re-traumatize people if it happens too fast. So one help now strategy is, I'm hoping a lot of you have something to drink. I have a cup of tea. If you have water, coffee, whatever that is, take your drink, and we're going to take it. This is a help now strategy. Take a drink of something. So mindfully take a drink of whatever you have within reach. And what that means is, as you take a drink, notice all the sensations that you experience as the liquid pours into your mouth, and see if you can follow the sensation all the way down your throat into your stomach. So I'm just going to do this very gently, and please do this with me. And just see if you can follow. I can feel the sensation. And what that does is that brings my attention gently back to my body without being in full embodiment too far, too fast. And it allows me to kickstart my digestion, which can help bring that flipping the lid back online. And so that's one really quick strategy that you can use immediately to start to bring yourself back online. And there are several more help now strategies. If you'd like to learn more, please reach out to me.